Welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs, and we have reached the end of another year. And if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know, since 2018, at the end of every year, I've done a little wrap-up of my favorite things of the year. Pardon my coughing and general congestion as I am recovering from catching COVID. Thankfully, myself and my spouse are both vaccinated and boosted, and so it's not as bad as it could have been, but it was still a lot, and I'm still in the process of recovering. But I wanted to make sure that I got in my end of year episode. I'm recording it the day before it airs, probably the closest I've recorded it to airing, but it's important that I get this to y'all. And so yeah, if you're unfamiliar, every year since 2018 I talk about my favorite thing in a bunch of different categories, and then talk about some standout moments from the year, not just on this podcast, but just across my entire life. And then close it out with a bunch of thank yous for folks that I work with, friends, and of course, industry peers or people I just genuinely admire. So to get started, let's start with the favorite stuff and talk about some of my favorite things to come out this year. Now, usually I talk about a favorite burlesque show, but since I've been pivoting away from burlesque, and there just wasn't a ton of live performance in 2021 that I was able to be a part of due to COVID and all of that other stuff, I've phased out that category for now. There's tons of great burlesque and burlesquers that roam in my orbit, and I will always promote them when given the opportunity. But I think for this year, it was just not a consideration. So with that said, let's get into it. My first favorite thing that I want to talk about was my favorite video game of the year. Gaming has become more and more prevalent with each passing year for me. I used to play a lot of video games, then didn't for a while, and now I'm back heavy into it, doing coverage for fun and games, going to cons when I can safely, and so on. And yeah, I played a lot of video games this year. As of when we're recording, I've completed, or beaten at least 45 different games this year, which feels like an accomplishment because typically I don't finish a lot of games in the past. And anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but my favorite game of 2021 was the long-awaited, and I say long-awaited sort of ironically, Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread is a game that had been rumored for a long time, and it's a direct sequel to one of my favorite Metroid games, Metroid Fusion. I didn't think we'd ever see a direct sequel to that 2D Metroid game, and so I'm super grateful for this game coming out this year. It was announced over the summer, and I lost my mind, and then it came out in October, and I devoured it. I do plan on playing it again. I've already beaten it at least once, but I loved every second of it. It is a nostalgia trip for me because the Metroid franchise is one of my favorites, though a new 2D game hadn't come out in a long time, not counting remakes. And I was just super grateful to get to play this one. I really loved it. And I'm excited for the future of this franchise and to hopefully finally get to dive into the Metroid Prime series, which I've never played. But yeah, if you're a Metroid fan and have been waiting on this one, definitely go check it out. I don't know what you're waiting for. It was a blast. Next is my favorite book/audiobook. The reason that these are two in one category is because I don't actually read a lot of physical books. I'm a very slow reader. I get easily distracted, and so I lump it in with audiobook so I can use an audiobook usually is what I've listened to in its entirety. And though I actually haven't finished this book, it is still easily my favorite book that I've listened to this year, and I've listened to a few. It was Where the Deer and the Antelope Play, The Pastoral Observations of One Ignorant American Who Loves to Walk Outside by Nick Offerman. Nick Offerman is one of my favorite actors and comedians. He is very funny, and his books are often very funny as well as very educational. And this one is great. He talks about certain parks and farms and just things he's engaged with and observed in the outside world, and talks about kind of the state of America as to its national parks and farmland. And it was really fascinating, really entertaining, and I'm looking forward to finishing it up. But it is easily one of my favorite things that I've listened to this year, book-wise. From there, we'll go to my favorite movie of the year. This one was close. There were a bunch of really great movies that I loved, but I think my unabashed favorite of the year is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I was absolutely blown away by this Marvel film. It's become my favorite Marvel film of all the films that have come out. And the cast is incredible. The jokes are incredible. The action's incredible. The music is awesome. It's just a really great, fun surprise of a movie. And like, I like Shang-Chi from the comics, my loose knowledge of him, at least as a character, but this movie just kind of absolutely blew me away. And if you haven't seen it yet, and if you're hesitant to watch Marvel movies, I still highly recommend this one because I think it stands outside of the Marvel machine as just a great flick on its own, especially if you like old school kung fu movies and things like that. I think this has that vibe with a modern twist, and I really, really enjoyed it. Keeping the Marvel train rolling, my favorite TV show of the year has been Hawkeye. As of when I'm recording this, I have not yet seen the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett, which I'm sure I'm going to love. But we're going to go with complete series, and Hawkeye is complete as of a week ago when I'm recording this, and I adored it. I adore the original Matt Fraction comics, though I have not read all of them. I've read a chunk of them, and this pays a nice homage to it while still being its own thing within the MCU. I'm hit or miss on Jeremy Renner as a human, but as Hawkeye, I think he does a great job, especially in this series. And Haley Stanfield is a revelation as Kate Bishop. I think she does an excellent job. I'm not going to get into spoilers since as of when I'm recording, the finale just aired, but there are some awesome surprises in the last few episodes as well that blew me away. I don't want to spoil the series for anybody who hasn't seen it, but if you like Hawkeye from the comics, if you've been a little disappointed with his showing in the MCU as a whole, I think you will really enjoy this TV series. I think it easily has become my favorite MCU Disney Plus TV show, with Loki coming in at a close second. But yeah, if you are a fan of Hawkeye and if you are a fan of the MCU's Hawkeye, this show is a must-watch. And I think also still a pretty good self-contained story within the MCU if you're just looking for something and don't actually watch every single MCU thing that comes out. Up next, let's move on to my favorite album of the year. This one was close. I listened to a lot of different full albums, including a bunch of video game soundtracks. A runner-up this year was definitely the Boyfriend Dungeon soundtrack, and I'll talk more about that a little later. But the album I listened to easily the most this year was Halsey's new record, If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power, which was produced by the incredible Trent Reznor. And this sounds like the best fusion of pop music and Nine Inch Nails music that I've ever heard. I've been obsessed with the album since it came out. I really loved it. And it was it's not a giant departure for Halsey, but it's definitely different. The folky stuff is still here and the pop stuff is still here, but all of the industrial metal related stuff has been really fine-tuned and is really well made. I've always been a big fan of Halsey and love all of her records, but this has easily become one of my favorites and easily my favorite of the year as I've kind of listened to it nonstop. And in keeping the tradition of also picking a single song that was my favorite of this year, it has to be Montero, Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X. The full album I've been obsessed with, but this song, since the moment it was released, I listened to on loop practically. Lil Nas X has become one of my favorite rappers in a long time. I think his rap and R&B work is phenomenal. You know, he was releasing singles and EPs for a long time, and people wondered if he could release a full album that also was incredibly awesome, and he did, and it was. And this track off it is so standout. It's not even my favorite track on the record, but it's become one of my favorite songs of the year because I just listened to it so much. It's just so catchy, so much fun to sing along to, so much fun to listen to. It's one of my favorite tracks to DJ with Infuser, a game I talked a lot about last year. And yeah, if you've not listened to any of Lil Nas X's stuff, I highly recommend starting with Montero and then listening to literally everything else he's ever released, ever. And finally, I'm going to talk about my favorite podcast of the year, which is slightly self-indulgent. For those who don't know, although I don't know how you wouldn't know, I am a giant Mass Effect fan, the video game franchise, and I got to be on the debut episode of a brand new Mass Effect-related podcast called Massively Affected, which is hosted by Josh Silverman. He is an incredible talent and a good friend of mine, and I got to be on the premiere episode of this brand new podcast where he interviewed different people talking about Mass Effect and asking the simple question, as he always puts it, why Mass Effect? Why is this game so important to people? And I'm so glad to help lay down the blueprint of this show by being his first guest and to steer through his format with him. He is an incredible host, and it is an incredible show. If you love the Mass Effect franchise on any level, this is a podcast that's a must listen. And honestly, even if you're not a fan of Mass Effect but have always been curious, this is a great way to hear some personal, deep stories about why people love this franchise so much and why it means so much to those people. It's definitely worth listening to. You can find it on butwhythough.com, which is a geeky website that I love, or you can find it on any podcast platform that you look on. It's everywhere. I am the very first episode. So if you want a friendly voice to guide you into this incredible podcast that you are familiar with, well, you're in luck, because that's me. So thank you again, Josh, for having me on that initial episode. And it is easily my favorite podcast that I got to listen to this year as a diehard Mass Effect fan, because so many friends of mine within and around the games industry and the geeky podcast industry were on that show talking about how much this series means to them. And I love those kinds of personal stories. So definitely, again, go check out Massively Affected. All right, let's shift gears into the standout moments of this year. I'm trying not to rush through this, but I just feel like these episodes have been long-winded in the past, and my voice is a little hoarse. And also, this year was a weird year. It felt very much like 2020, the sequel. I'm still living in an interim apartment. I've still not returned to my home that the roof caught fire of last year. Hopefully in 2022, it is looking optimistic that we will be back and in the first half of the year. But that's been really hard. And so that was a tough starting point to know that it was still going to be a while before we got back into our home. And I struggled with some day job stuff and had to refocus, but I'm really proud and excited that I've been able to refocus and look into podcasting full time. I'm applying for podcast producer positions at a variety of places, and I'm really energized to try and refocus and pursue full time the thing that I've wanted to do and I have done for so long. So keep an eye out for that as I announce more stuff that I'm working on. I am currently working on 1 or 2 projects that I can't even talk about yet, but I'm very excited for, one of which is a brand that I've talked about before, that I've worked with before. And so I'm really excited for that. And so more to come for that in 2022. But with ups and downs aside, on a professional level, I accomplished a lot of really cool stuff this year. For one, I got to interview one of my voice acting idols, Yuri Lowenthal, not once, but twice. And the second time, he asked to come back on, which is just still feels unreal to me. He was a guest on Fun and Games. I reached out to him last year, and he was too busy, but I followed up this year, and he came on, and we had a blast chatting with him. And then months later, when they officially announced Spider-Man 2 for PS5, he asked to come back on and promote that and He-Man and some other stuff, because he is the voice of the new Prince Adam and He-Man in the newest reboot cartoon, which is phenomenal. And it was just great to get to chat with this guy. He is lovely and kind and is so generous with his time and is engaging. And whenever I've posted about his work or post about him coming on the show, he shares it and talks about it. He's just a wonderful human being. I will at some point have him here on Autographs as well. But I'm just incredibly honored and humbled that he not only came on the show, but then wanted to come back of his own volition, not because I asked him to come back. It's just, that's the kind of honor that you don't get often in this industry from anyone. And so it's always exciting when someone asks to come back on a thing that you do, because it shows that they really do like that thing that you do. Shifting gears a little bit, I talked about Mass Effect earlier. Obviously, folks know I host Reignite with previous guest Frankie Bradley Lestrange. The Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out this year back in May, which is a remaster of the original trilogy, and it was glorious to finally have this thing. They announced it last year. I've been so excited for it, and of course I played through it immediately, reliving my glory days as Commander Shepard, making new choices and some of the same choices. That was a landmark moment for me. I got a Legendary Cache version of it too, which came with a steelbook not the game itself. I still had to buy that digitally, but a actual wearable N7 helmet from the game, art prints, a letter from Commander Anderson, or Admiral Anderson by the end of the game, actually. And I love this game series so much. I'm going to probably play it again soon because I've been thinking about it a lot. It has become part of who I am. What people know me for, which is still kind of astonishing to me since I had no hand in making it whatsoever. And to that end, also, Frankie and I finished our original run of the original trilogy this year back in July and have now started playing Andromeda, which I've never played, in the newest, the 4th season of Reignite, which I am also incredibly excited for. And if you have been looking for a starting point but didn't want to hear the whole original trilogy but would like to hear our thoughts on Andromeda, something I've never played before, you can definitely go check that out. We're only, as of when I'm recording this, we're only 5 episodes into that new season, so definitely go check that out. Sticking with the video game theme a little bit further, an indie game I've been looking forward to for a very long time, Boyfriend Dungeon, which is part dungeon crawler and dating sim where you date your weapons. I'd been looking forward to for a long time, and it dropped this year in August, and I fell in love with it. I played it on the PC Game Pass at no cost to me because I already have Game Pass, and then immediately bought it on Switch and played it again. It is a phenomenal game. It's one of my favorites of the year. It is so exciting to have a delightfully queer game that is not all sunshines and rainbows and has some real issues that it deals with, some real red flags that you see in the queer community, and ultimately having a great story and some incredible characters and portraying romance in a variety of different ways, not just cis hetero relationships, but diverse, queer, non-binary, trans, bisexual, asexual relationships, like just showing relationships on all levels, even a relationship between a person and their pet. Like it's a really well thought out, incredible game that will be getting DLC in the nearest future. And I just really loved it. If you're looking for something incredibly queer and incredibly entertaining and fun, that's also heartfelt and tells some real feeling stories, I can't recommend Boyfriend Dungeon enough by Kit Fox Games. Sticking with the video game theme, I had some genuine surprises this year. Life is Strange, True Colors, and Guardians of the Galaxy both caught me off guard. Guardians of the Galaxy and Life is Strange, True Colors ended up being 2 of my favorites this year as well. And I didn't expect that. I didn't have high hopes for either of those games, and they ended up blowing me away, having heartfelt, emotional moments, and incredible writing and voice acting. So just want to recommend those as well if you're looking for games to play. Because they are really engaging and I think very new game player friendly. Someone who doesn't play a lot of games, you could play those 2 games with relative ease, I think, and ease into them. Let's talk about Side Quests. So Side Quests is a sub-series within the Fun and Games podcast feed. As of when I'm recording this, we've released 126 episodes of that series, 76 of them this year. Super happy with that show. I get so many compliments on the personal stories and just sharing other people's voices. I think that I never imagined Side Quests would take off like this. I always have at least 5 to 10 episodes banked and ready to go for this series. I'm so glad that I'm releasing so many episodes every 2 weeks and that people continue to want to do it. And even more importantly, people continue to want to come back and do it. Having tons of repeat guests like Derek Van Dyke and Case Aiken, of course, from here at Certain POV, and fellow co-hosts like Jeff Moonen and so on. Like, it's just, I'm so glad that people really love this show and really love doing it. Newcomers like Cam Hawkins, who I've always wanted to work with, there's something about talking about a game you love and why you love it, just simply with no judgment or having to rate it or explain the bad or explain certain things. It's nice to have a judgment-free space where people can talk about something they love, regardless of how it did critically or what other people think of it. So that's been really nice. And the reception's been very warm. No one coming into the comments to say, no, this game sucks. What are you talking about? Like, everyone is just super supportive, sharing the episodes and also talking about why they love those games that are covered. So that's been really lovely. I guested on so many podcasts this year, probably more than any other year. I guested on 15 different podcasts this year, probably more, and I've forgotten some, who knows. But the 15 that I could remember and go back and find that I guested on, and I just want to list them out so you can go check them out. Those podcasts were Burnout Brighter, Massively Affected, as I mentioned earlier, the Backlog Battle podcast, Cutscenes, a video game movie podcast, Shooting the Shit, Suggestive Language, RPG University, multiple times, Hamburger Lore, the Corporate Mascot Lore podcast, Pass the Controller, Games Are Queer, Let's Rewatch, I made a return to, Comics Quest, The Music That Made We, and SDGC I made a return to as well. I'm looking forward to being on more podcasts in the new year. I know I'm going to eventually be partnering up with Lore Party and working with them to put something out. I'm endlessly excited for the collaborations that I've gotten to do and will get to do that I know are on the horizon. I love podcasting. It's become my passion over the last decade, and I'm so lucky to have so many other people to collaborate with, and I'm going to collaborate with so many more. There's so many incredible guests that I got to have this year on this very show, and I'm going to have so many more even next year, people that I've been wanting to work with for ages and bring on the show for ages, and I'm looking forward to that. I expanded the reach of my podcast this year. Follower counts for and subscription numbers for all of my podcasts went up over the last year. And that's because of my incredible guests, my awesome co-hosts, and just finding a way to lean into what I really loved this past year. I've always been working on podcasts, but it's only for the last few years that I really put a focus into it, not DJing as much. And part of that is the pandemic as well, and the convenience of being able to do something like this. But even cutting back on my streams, I was streaming a lot, and I love streaming on Twitch, but I think focusing on podcasting and making it the thing that I want to do and be known for, and have become to be known for, which is also pretty cool, has been amazing. So keep an eye here and on all the other places I make podcasts, because things are only going to grow and get even better. Speaking of podcasts, one of the first episodes of next year is going to be about Pax Unplugged, the board game convention that PAX does every year, although they didn't last year, of course. It's in Philly. I got to go for the first time this year, and I got to cover it as press for the first time this year, which was pretty awesome. I interviewed a bunch of incredible mainstream and independent board game creators, some folks who work in the space outside of the board games, just either writing them or working on them, not tied to any specific game on its own. It was just really cool people. I'm not going to list them off here, but that episode is going to be the first 2022 episode, and I'm very excited for it. I had a blast covering the event. I also got to experience it with previous guests, Robert and Katie, as well as my incredible spouse, Sarah. I saw a ton of friends there as well, and we bought some games. We played a ton of board games. It was a really cool experience, and I had a blast. I got to meet Mark Meir, the voice of Male Commander Shepard, as well as a few other characters in the Mass Effect franchise. He was lovely and kind and so generous with his time. He let me gush about the games and why they've meant so much to me. He was very sweet. I got to connect with Urban Bohemian, a.k.a. Brian Gray, who I had never met. Well, I had met in person once, but we didn't know each other then. We'd only met once and had come to know each other through the internet. So it was great to hang out with him a bit and get to see his panel for his incredible TT RPG podcast and live show that he's on called Rivals of Waterdeep, which was put on an incredible live show with some awesome guests, some of which who I hope to have on this show in the new year. And of course, one of the biggest things that happened this year, Crash Chords Autographs became CPOV Autographs. Crash Chords holds a special place on my heart. The Original Music Podcast will always be my original passion, the thing that got me into podcasting, and the website I kept maintained for so long because I wanted to keep that brand alive. But as it became clearer and clearer that there wouldn't be any more new content from Crash Chords besides autographs, it was time to move this podcast, where all my other podcasts already were, to Certain POV. And with the help of former producer of this show and good friend, Steve Nagel, we migrated the show. We migrated it to Libsyn off of Blueberry, and We migrated the web page stuff to the Certain POV website and certainpov.com, and changed the name, upgraded and updated the artwork done by the incredible Case Aiken, featuring designs by the incredible Joy Amons. And so we have a brand new name, a brand new logo, and updated website. And, you know, it's sad to say goodbye to Crash Chords. It's been such an important part of my life over these last 10 or 11 years, and maybe it'll be back in some form or another. You know, Steve and I always talk about bringing back some kind of music review podcast, but, you know, just timing is really rough, and it's hard to make that time for something as in-depth as that show was. But I do miss Crash Chords. I do miss working with John and Steve regularly. I do in the new year plan to have Steve on this show as well to talk about what he's been up to. But it was just time to move on. And thank you also to Case Aiken at Certain POV for helping me do the migration also on the CPOV side. It went as smooth as it could have, with some hiccups along the way, but I'm so grateful to be in my new home where y'all are listening right now. And who knows what the future of Crash Chords holds. That crashchords.com is still up and available. You can see the original stuff that's over there. And of course, the Crash Chords podcast is still available on all podcast platforms. If you ever want to go back and listen, we covered some really cool albums during the life of that show, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. So yeah, I think as far as standout moments of the year, like, I think that really covers it. I mean, a big highlight this week is, while I did get sick with COVID, and that was not a highlight, that was definitely a standout moment, but not a good one. We've been dog sitting our neighbor and landlord's dog, Ziggy, and he is a delight, and I love him. I'm going to be hysterical, weepy mess when we give him back to his owners, because he's been delightful to have around and is just a giant sweetheart puppy. He's a Labrador Doodle mix, and he has my heart. And so I wanted to give him a shout out here as well. Yeah, a lot of stuff this year. What does 2022 hold for this podcast and moments like this? I don't know. I mean, there are big games that I'm looking forward to next year. There are cool projects I'm looking forward to next year. And I'm going to try and just continue to make what I do the priority as far as growth and improvement. I've done nothing but expand and improve these podcasts, and I plan to keep doing that as I try and grow my quote-unquote brand and make the world know me as the podcast guy, right? Because that's ultimately what I want to be. Is I want people to pay me to make their podcasts, and some people do, and I just want to grow that roster as I continue to do a ton of work. You know, I'm thankful for those who have hired me, both past and present, and looking forward to just doing more incredible work, both here on Autographs and then just kind of across the board. We're going to shift to thank yous. This is going to be a shorter episode, I think, just because I'm a little sick. I, of course, waited till the last minute, which is on me. But also, you know, I think dwelling on stuff this year is less the theme I want to go for and more looking to the future. I'm really excited for the kinds of things that are going to be possible in 2022. And I'm hoping to just do nothing but grow and expand everything that I'm working on. So with that, some important thank yous. First and foremost, my incredible spouse, Sarah Storm. None of this would be possible without her. The fact that she always has my back, roots for me, cheers me on, supports me. She's, of course, the lovely voice that you get to hear at the end of every episode, reading my thank yous and credits. And I couldn't do this without her. She's the one encouraging me to lean into the podcasting and try and find a permanent full-time gig in that space. And it's because of her that I'm able to do that. I am endlessly proud of her year after year for all the awesome stuff she's accomplished. If you have not listened to the podcast Hello Monday yet, please go check that out. She produces that show, hosted by previous guest of this show, Jesse Hempel, and is an incredible show. Also, she's a huge part of This Is Working, which is another great podcast that you should check out over on LinkedIn. LinkedIn really kind of changing the game for news, and especially job news, which is more important now than ever. So thank you, Sarah, for allowing me to do what I love and loving me while I do it. I couldn't do it without you. My partners in crime, Reina Sinclair and Betty Brash, I haven't seen in way too long, but I adore and miss. And though we are no longer producing Magical Girl Burlesque together, that time will always hold a special place in my heart. And they're still my friends, even though we don't produce burlesque together. And so I really appreciate them and all of the support of my work that they've given me over the years. Next, I want to start thanking some of my Certain POV family, because without them, none of this would literally be possible. Case Aiken, Hans, Steven the Cine Guy, J. Mike Folson, Jeff Moonen, my co-host at Fun and Games, Frankie Bradley Lestrange, my co-host at Reignite, Rachel Quirky Schenk, my co-host over on Screen Snark, Brett, Sam, Ash, and Pat. I want to thank Alex, Angela Bones Bullock, Jenna Garrett, Brian Baker, JD Martin, Robin, Nicole, Gloria, Kelsey, Rose Mensa, all of the folks over at Certain POV, our incredible audience over at Certain POV who interact on the Discord and interact right here, who send me messages and are just lovely to chat with. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this network. I want to thank the incredible Victor Devon, who I helped launch a podcast with this year. I mentioned The Music That Made We, which is a new show within the We Burlesque podcast feed. I got to get interviewed and then interview Victor for that show, and that was a blast. Thank you, Victor, for always believing in me and thinking of me immediately when you want to work on stuff and do things. I forgot to mention earlier, I'm actually nominated for some Silver Tusk Awards. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. If you want to vote for me, you can go to that link that I provided in the show notes, or just go to weburlesque.com and vote in the Silver Tusk Awards. I'm nominated for, I believe, 3 awards this year, so thank you also for that. Katie, Bug, and Robert Prine, 2 of my best friends who I adore. Rob Strobin, someone whose name I'll never get right, and yet he still loves me. John Lestrange, who I should have mentioned in the Certain POV section, because he and his partner, my co-host Frankie Bradley Lestrange, do Certain Point of View, a seasonal Christmas and Christmas adjacent, holiday adjacent podcast. And that's going on right now as we speak. And so, John, thank you also for always believing in me and just being a great human. The Blurred Girl, Teresa Galasaurus, Alex, Inigo, Jacob McCourt, Evan Ross Katz, Chris Chipman, Patrick Willems, Scott White, Lucas Brooks, Scott Thomas, Abu Safar, Leo Wiggins, Connor Lawrence, Kevin, Michael Kill, Joey Amons. These are folks who have been integral to this or my other podcasts, have had me on their podcasts or are going to have me on their podcasts or just inspire me on the regular. Speaking of inspiration, Patrick Klepek, Rob Zachney, Gita Jackson, Natalie Watson, Danielle Riendo, Kato, all incredible podcasters who I adore in the video game space. Continuing on, Merritt K, Stephen Strom, John Warren, Ken Shepard, Eric Van Allen, Leanna Rupert, Cam Hawkins, Jesse Vitelli, Brendan Groom, Cam Koenig, Nate Brandt, Jessica Howard, Ty Gallas-Rowe, Kate Sanchez, Josh Silverman, Luis Amaya. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name, Luis. I adore you, my friend. Alex Van Aken, Bryden Kex, Wout, Pilnock, Derek Van Dyke, Reb Valentine, John Phipps, Zach Justin, Finn, Maddie G, Brittany, Sam, Jeff, Rar, Charlotte, and so many more folks with and in and around the video game podcasting space and content creation space who have all been super integral in this past year. Some of those names are previous guests of this and my other shows. Some of those folks are just cool people who I'm friends with, who I adore, who got me through this past year. I'm sure there's so many other people I'm forgetting to thank. Honestly, this year was really humbling because it showed me how many people actually not only love my work, but also see the work that I'm putting in. And I'm endlessly grateful for that. It's been a wild ride of a year. It's going to be a wild ride next year. I'm so thankful and grateful to still be on this earth doing it. And thankful for those who support me, those who I forgot to thank you. If you're thinking in this moment, hey, he didn't thank me, I'm thanking you now. My memory is a little foggy as I recover from COVID, but I'm endlessly grateful for the people who've given me a platform and a space. New friends I've made this year, old friends I've reconnected with. It's just, I'm really a really, really lucky person, and I'm never not going to be thankful for how lucky I am. So thank you for sticking with me through all this mushy stuff. Thank you for listening. Sorry that this one's a little shorter than usual. I hope it's okay. Let me know in the comments or online. Tell me what some of your favorite moments were this year. I don't usually do like a question for the audience at the end, but reply. If you listen to this episode, reply to the tweet, either on Twitter or on Facebook, the post, or comment on the Certain POV website. What were some of your favorite moments of the year? Let me know. I would love to know. I really would. Thank you for spending your time with me. And I will see you in 2022. And just remember, music is life, and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.matt.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.